Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it.
Don't take it off, just look at yourself one more time. I stood frozen before the mirror, my hands gripping the hem of the dress, unsure if I was terrified of the woman staring back, or terrified that I had recognized her all along. In this story, I will tell you about the exact day a simple piece of clothing stripped away the person I thought I was, and left me with the woman I was meant to be. I never used to care about how I looked. For the first 20-odd years of my life, my wardrobe was a monotonous rotation of dark, oversized t-shirts, faded denim jeans, and scuffed sneakers. I was Ethan Cole, a guy who blended into the background, someone who kept his hair just a little too long and his head perpetually down. I didn't think about fabrics, or colors, or how a silhouette draped across a body. Clothing was purely functional, a thick, heavy armor, designed to get me through the day without drawing any unwanted attention. But recently, the armor had started to feel suffocating. My older sister, Megan, was the first to notice the subtle fractures in my routine. Over the last few months, she had caught me lingering a little too long in front of the hallway mirror. She had noticed how I'd started running my hands over the soft silk of her blouses when we were doing laundry, or how I would secretly spritz a tiny bit of her floral perfume onto my wrist when I thought the house was empty. I always had an excuse ready. I was just checking a stain. I accidentally grabbed the wrong bottle, but Megan's sharp blue eyes always held a knowing, quiet suspicion. The turning point arrived on a humid Friday afternoon. Megan and I had driven up to a lake house owned by her best friend, Claire, for a weekend getaway. It was supposed to be a standard summer retreat, drinks on the porch, swimming, and barbecue. But there was a problem. When we arrived and began unpacking the car, the trunk was half empty. My duffel bag, which had been sitting in the driveway while we loaded the cooler, had been left behind. I was 3 hours away from home with absolutely nothing but the sweaty, sticky clothes I was currently wearing. "I can't believe you did that," Megan sighed, rubbing her temples as we stood in Claire's rustic, sunlit living room. "I thought you put it in," I muttered, my skin crawling with the uncomfortable heat of my damp t-shirt. Claire, ever the optimistic host, waved a hand dismissively. "It's fine. Don't panic. You can borrow something. Let me see what I have." I followed Claire into the master bedroom. She dug through her closet, but quickly realized her boyfriend had taken all his clothes back to his apartment the week prior. Her closet was a sea of floral prints, delicate straps, and pastel colors. I stood awkwardly by the door, crossing my arms over my chest, feeling entirely out of place in this feminine sanctuary. "Well," Claire said, turning around with a playful, yet somewhat hesitant smile. She was holding up a pale blue summer dress. It was made of a soft, flowing chiffon with delicate spaghetti straps and a gently cinched waist. "It's going to be sweltering tonight. This is really breathable." My heart did a strange, violent flutter against my ribs. My immediate instinct was to throw up a defensive wall. "No way," I scoffed, my voice cracking slightly. "Absolutely not. I'm not wearing a dress, Claire." Claire didn't push. She didn't mock me, nor did she laugh. She simply smiled gently, walked over to the guest bed, and laid the blue dress out perfectly flat against the white quilt. "I'll leave it here, just in case you change your mind. Ethan, nobody is going to judge you here." She stepped out of the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click. I was alone. For 10 minutes, I paced the wooden floor of the guest bedroom. The summer heat was unbearable, my jeans clinging to my legs like wet cement. But my discomfort wasn't just physical anymore. My eyes kept darting to the bed. That pale blue dress seemed to pull at the gravity in the room. It sat there, soft, delicate, and entirely forbidden. "It's just a piece of fabric," I told myself. "It's a joke, a practical solution to a stupid problem." My hands were shaking as I reached for the hem of my sweaty t-shirt. I pulled it over my head and tossed it into the corner. I unbuttoned my heavy jeans and stepped out of them, kicking away my socks. Stripped down to my boxers, I felt vulnerable, my body pale and masculine in the afternoon light. I walked over to the bed, My fingers trembled as they grazed the chiffon. It was impossibly cool and soft against my skin, a stark contrast to the rough cotton and heavy denim I had worn my entire life. Swallowing hard, I picked it up. I didn't let myself think. If I thought about it, I would stop. I lifted the dress and slipped it over my head. The sensation was instantaneous and overwhelming. The fabric slid down my chest, settling weightlessly around my waist, before cascading down to my knees. The sudden draft of cool air against my bare thighs made me shiver. I reached up, clumsily adjusting the thin straps over my broad shoulders, smoothing the fabric down my torso. I closed my eyes, terrified to look in the mirror attached to the wardrobe. I expected to feel like a clown. I expected to feel a deep burning shame, a grotesque caricature of a man trapped in a woman's garment. Slowly, I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection. The breath caught in my throat. I didn't look ridiculous. The dress didn't mock me. Instead, it softened my edges. The pale blue complemented my skin, and the cinched waist gave my torso a subtle, elegant shape I had never seen before. I took a tentative step back, watching how the hem swished and danced around my knees with a fluid grace. A profound, terrifying sense of peace washed over me. The heavy armor was gone. I felt light. I felt right. A soft knock at the door shattered the silence. Before I could panic and rip the dress off, the door swung open. It was Megan. I froze, my hands instinctively flying up to cover my chest, my face burning with a fiery blush. Megan, I can explain. I was just hot and... Megan didn't scream. She didn't laugh at me. She stepped into the room, closed the door quietly, and leaned against it. A soft, incredibly tender smile spread across her face. Ethan, she whispered, relax. She walked over to me, her eyes sweeping over the dress. She didn't look at me like I was a freak. She looked at me with the same quiet understanding she had shown when she caught me staring at her vanity all those months ago. It's a beautiful color on you, she said softly. But if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. Sit down. I was too stunned to argue. I sat on the edge of the bed as Megan went to work. She wasn't trying to turn me into a clown for her amusement. She was treating this with an intense, quiet respect. She pulled a lightweight, white knit cardigan from her own bag and draped it over my shoulders. This softens the shoulder line, she explained, her voice steady and calming. Then, she handed me a small, unopened package and put these on. I looked down. It was a pair of sheer, nude pantyhose. My hands shook as I opened the package. Following her gentle instructions, I rolled the delicate nylon up my legs. The sensation was entirely foreign, a tight, smooth compression that made my legs feel incredibly sleek, erasing the masculine roughness of my skin. It made me hyper-aware of my lower half, of the way my knees pressed together, of the feminine posture I was subconsciously adopting. She handed me a pair of simple beige flats, which miraculously fit my feet well enough. Finally, Megan pulled me over to the vanity mirror. She took a brush and worked it through my unkempt hair, parting it deeply to one side, letting it frame my face softly. She applied a touch of glossy lip balm to my mouth, and with a soft brush, swept the faintest hint of peach blush across my cheekbones. Look, she commanded gently. I looked into the glass. The person staring back at me was breathtaking. The white cardigan hid the width of my chest. The blue dress flowed beautifully, and the sheer pantyhose made my legs look elegant and long. The slight makeup didn't scream drag. It simply highlighted a softness in my face I had spent my whole life ignoring. The most confusing, terrifying part of it all was that I didn't feel funny. I didn't want to laugh. I felt a deep, warm rush of comfort pooling in my stomach. I felt pretty. Suddenly, the bedroom door clicked open again. I gasped, spinning around. Claire stood in the doorway, holding a tray of iced tea. Panic seized my chest. My hands flew to the hem of the dress. A desperate instinct to pull it down, to hide, to apologize for being such a pervert, such a freak. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. Claire froze. The ice clinked softly in the glasses. She looked at my styled hair, the white cardigan, the pantyhose, and the blue dress. She didn't laugh. Her eyes softened, widening with genuine admiration. "Oh, Ethan," Claire breathed out, a warm, brilliant smile breaking across her face. "You actually look really, really pretty." The compliment hit me like a physical blow. It bypassed my brain and went straight to my soul. A hot flush of pleasure radiated through my body. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding inside my clothes. I wasn't wearing armor. As Claire stepped into the room, offering me a glass of tea, with a casual, welcoming grace, a terrifying, intoxicating thought bloomed in the back of my mind. I didn't want to take the dress off. I didn't want to hide in the guest room. I wanted to walk out onto that porch. I wanted to stay like this. For the very first time in my life, I wanted to be seen. I woke up the next morning with the sunlight filtering through the guest room blinds, my body tangled in the white cotton sheets. For a brief, hazy second, my brain tried to convince me that the previous evening had been a bizarre, feverish dream, a temporary lapse in reality brought on by the summer heat and a missing duffel bag. I sat up, looking down at the oversized gray t-shirt and baggy flannel boxers I had borrowed from Claire's ex-boyfriend's abandoned drawer to sleep in. This was normal. This was Ethan. Rough fabrics, loose fits, zero shape. But as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, the illusion of normalcy shattered. My skin felt hypersensitive. I could still feel the phantom touch of the sheer nylon wrapped tightly around my calves. When I stood up, my knees instinctively knocked together. A subconscious effort to control a chiffon skirt that was no longer there. I walked to the bathroom, and my hand reached up to brush a strand of hair away from my face, pausing when I realized the delicate clip Megan had put in my hair the night before was gone. I gripped the edges of the bathroom sink, staring at my bare, scrubbed face in the mirror. I looked like a guy who had just rolled out of bed. But underneath the stubble and the tired eyes, a terrifying question echoed in my mind. Why do I miss it? I shouldn't have remembered the way the hem of that blue dress brushed against my knees with such vivid, aching clarity. I shouldn't have missed the gentle compression of the pantyhose, or the way the faint scent of peach blush had lingered on my cheeks. It was supposed to be a costume, a funny story to tell years from now. Instead, it felt like an awakening. The bedroom door clicked open. I poked my head out of the bathroom to see Megan carrying a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and a stack of hangers in the other. "Morning," she said casually, setting the coffee on the nightstand. She laid the hangers across the unmade bed. "Claire and I are making breakfast. I figured we should figure out what you're wearing today." I looked at the clothes she had brought. There were no oversized t-shirts or cargo shorts. "Megan, I don't know," I started, rubbing the back of my neck, the masculine gesture suddenly feeling forced and clumsy. "Last night it was a necessity. I don't need to do it again in the daylight." "Ethan," Megan said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. She didn't push, but she didn't pack the clothes away either. "Last night, when you were sitting on the porch with us in that dress, you actually looked relaxed. I haven't seen you sit that still, without fidgeting, in years. Just look at what I brought. If you hate it, I'll drive into town and buy you some jeans." I hesitated, but my eyes betrayed me, drifting toward the fabrics laid out on the quilt. There was a beautiful cream-colored dress with a modest, scoop neckline and a flared skirt. To it was a pale pink button-down cardigan, so fine it looked like spun sugar. But what caught my attention wasn't just the clothes themselves. It was the realization that my brain was already piecing the outfit together. Without thinking, my hand reached out and touched the soft wool of the pink cardigan. "This one," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. "This goes well with the cream, doesn't it?" Megan's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of pleasant surprise crossing her features. "It does. It complements your skin tone perfectly." She wasn't dictating my look anymore. I was choosing it. The realization sent a thrilling jolt of adrenaline straight to my core. I wasn't just accepting what was handed to me. I was actively participating in my own feminization. Megan handed me a small, cellophane-wrapped square. "Try these today. They're different from last night." I retreated to the bathroom and locked the door. My hands were remarkably steady as I opened the package. Instead was a pair of sheer, black tights. I stripped off the baggy boxers and sat on the edge of the bathtub, rolling the dark, delicate fabric down to the toe. I slipped my foot inside and began to pull them up. The contrast was mesmerizing. The sheer black nylon smoothed over the pale skin of my legs, masking any masculine roughness and replacing it with a sleek, shadowed elegance. I stood up, shimming the waistband up to my hips. The tights hugged my thighs and lifted my rear slightly, altering the way I stood. I had to push my hips forward, arching my lower back to balance myself. Next came the cream dress. It slid over my head, the lining cool against my skin. I pulled the pink cardigan over my shoulders, leaving the top few buttons undone. When I stepped back into the bedroom, Megan was holding a pair of black, patent leather Mary Janes. I slipped my nylon-clad feet into them, leaning down to snap the delicate straps across my insteps. The soft click of the fastener felt like locking a new identity into place. Megan motioned for me to sit at the vanity again. This time, I didn't resist. I sat down, my knees pressed tightly together, my hands resting demurely in my lap. She took a brush to my hair, pulling the top half back and securing it with a subtle tortoiseshell clip, letting the rest fall softly around my shoulders. She fastened a tiny, silver chain with a pearl pendant around my neck. The cool metal rested against my collarbone. I looked into the mirror. Yesterday, my first thought had been, I am playing a girl. But today, looking at the way the pink cardigan softened my shoulders, the way the sheer black tights made my legs look impossibly graceful, the narrative in my head began to shift. I'm trying a different version of me. I leaned closer to the glass. I adjusted my posture, rolling my shoulders back to accentuate the scoop of the dress. I reached down and smoothed the skirt over my thighs. I wasn't scared of the reflection anymore. I was studying her. I was looking for flaws, not because I was ashamed of being a man in a dress, but because I desperately wanted the woman in the mirror to look perfect. I realized, with a heavy sinking feeling of inevitability, that I wasn't rushing. Yesterday, the sound of footsteps had sent me into a panic. Today, I was taking my time, making sure the seam of my tights was straight, making sure the pearl rested dead center on my chest. Why is this version of me so much more comfortable? I asked my reflection. She didn't answer, but she looked back at me with a serene, quiet confidence I had never possessed. Ready? Megan asked softly. I took a deep breath, nodded, and stood up. The Mary Janes gave a soft, feminine tap against the hardwood as I followed her out of the room. Claire was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes at the stove. As I walked in, the skirt of the cream dress swished around my knees. I felt a sudden fleeting spike of anxiety, but I forced myself to walk with purpose, placing one foot directly in front of the other to keep my hips swaying gently. Claire turned around. Her eyes swept over my outfit, the pink cardigan, the sheer black legs, the strapped shoes. Oh, I love the black tights with the cream, Claire said. Her tone so effortlessly casual it made my head spin. She didn't sound like she was placating a man. She sounded like she was talking to a girlfriend. It gives it a really chic, vintage vibe. Coffee is on the counter. Pour me a cup too, would you? I walked to the counter, my heart fluttering. Sure, I said, my voice naturally pitching up just a fraction, softening at the edges. As I poured the coffee, Claire leaned against the island, sipping from her mug. We're just going to lounge by the lake today, she said, looking at me. But you might want to cross your legs at the ankles in that chair. The skirt is a little shorter than the blue one when you sit. She gestured to the bar stools. I climbed onto one, and instinctively, guided by her subtle female-coded instruction, I pressed my knees tightly together and swept my ankles to the side, folding my hands in my lap. It was a tiny moment, a mundane morning interaction over coffee, but it shifted the earth beneath my feet. Claire wasn't tiptoeing around my masculinity. She was inviting me into her space, sharing the unspoken rules of how women sit, how women dress, how women exist in the world. She was treating me like one of the girls. I looked down at my nylon-covered knees, at the delicate Mary Janes dangling from the stool, and at the pink sleeve of my cardigan. A wave of euphoria washed over me, so intense it made my fingertips tingle, closely followed by a wave of absolute terror. The line between Ethan and the woman in the mirror wasn't just blurring anymore. I was beginning to realize that I wanted to erase it completely. The afternoon faded into a hazy, golden evening, and the safe, insulated bubble of the lake house was about to burst. Claire walked into the living room, tossing her wet hair into a messy bun. "I don't feel like cooking again," she announced, grabbing her keys from the counter. "There's a great little seafood place in the harbor town about 20 minutes from here. Let's go get oysters and wine." My stomach instantly tied itself into a cold, tight knot. I looked down at the cream dress and the pink cardigan. It was one thing to sit on a private porch, shielded by trees, playing dress-up with two women who already knew my secret. It was an entirely different universe to walk into a crowded public restaurant. "I think I'll just stay here," I said quickly, my voice tight. "I can make a sandwich. You guys go." Megan, who had been reading a magazine on the sofa, looked up. She didn't argue immediately. Instead, she stood up, walked over to me, and gently took my arm. "Come with me for a second." She led me back into the guest bedroom, closing the door behind us. The room had become my sanctuary, the only place in the world where I was allowed to shed my skin. "You don't have to go if you're terrified," Megan said, her voice a low, soothing murmur. "But if you stay here, you're going to put those baggy boxers back on, sit in the dark, and feel miserable. And I know you don't want to take the tights off yet." A hot flush crept up my neck. She was right. The sheer black nylon hugging my legs had become a second skin, a comforting pressure I was dreading losing. "I have one more outfit," Megan said softly. She walked over to the closet and pulled out a hanger. "It's a little bolder, but I think it's going to change everything for you." I stared at the garment. It was a striking cherry red dress. It had a fitted bodice, 3/4 sleeves, and a sharp A-line skirt that flared out from the waist. It wasn't soft and passive like the pastel blue or the cream. It was a dress that demanded to be seen. "Try it," she urged. I stripped off the cream dress and carefully slipped the red one over my head. I smoothed it down over my torso, feeling the fabric pull snug against my ribs before blossoming outward at the waist. Megan handed me a tailored, cream-colored trench coat, which I slid my arms into, leaving it unbuttoned to frame the red fabric beneath. Next, she placed a pair of shoes on the floor. They weren't flats. They were black, pointed toe pumps with a low 2-inch heel. My breath hitched. "Megan, I don't know how to walk in those." "You learn by doing," she smiled. I slipped my nylon-clad feet into the heels. The moment I stood up, my entire physiology was forced to alter. The heel shifted my center of gravity forward. To keep from falling, I had to engage my calves, push my hips out slightly, and roll my shoulders back. The A-line skirt draped perfectly over this new exaggerated arch in my lower back, creating an undeniable illusion of curved hips. Megan sat me down at the vanity one last time. This time, the makeup was more deliberate. She applied a thin, sharp line of eyeliner, a coat of mascara that made my eyelashes look impossibly long, and a muted berry-toned lipstick. She took a curling iron to the ends of my hair, giving it a bouncy, polished wave. Finally, she pressed a small, black leather clutch into my hands. I stood up and faced the full-length mirror. I gasped. Taking a stumbling step back, my hands flew to my mouth. The person in the mirror wasn't Ethan trying on female clothes. It was a woman. The structure of the dress, the lift of the heels, the makeup, it completely rewrote my silhouette. I wasn't awkwardly tugging at the hem anymore. I watched my reflection as I took a tentative step forward. The heels clicked sharply against the wood, forcing my hips to sway in a slow, rhythmic pendulum motion. My shoulders were relaxed, my chin was up. I didn't feel like a man in a costume. I felt dangerous. I felt beautiful. "Let's go," I whispered, my voice trembling, with a mixture of absolute terror and intoxicating adrenaline. The ride to the harbor town was a blur of nervous energy. When we parked and walked toward the restaurant, every sensory detail was magnified tenfold. I felt the cool evening breeze slice through my sheer tights. I felt the satisfying, authoritative click-clack of my heels on the pavement. I gripped my small clutch with both hands, holding it delicately in front of my waist. Walking into the restaurant, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, terrified that the hostess, the waiters, or the patrons would take one look at me and scream imposter. But nothing happened. The hostess smiled warmly, grabbed 3 menus, and said, right this way, ladies. Ladies, the word hit me like a shot of pure dopamine. We were seated at a high-top table near the bar. The ambient lighting was dim, casting a flattering, golden glow over the room. After a few minutes, Claire and Megan excused themselves to go to the restroom, leaving me alone at the table. Panic flared in my chest. I was completely exposed. I crossed my legs tightly, the friction of the nylons making a soft, whispery sound, and looked down at my drink, praying no one would look too closely. That is an incredible color on you. The voice came from my right. It was a deep, smooth, masculine baritone. I flinched, my head snapping up. Standing at the edge of the bar, holding a rocks glass, was a man. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark, neatly trimmed hair, broad shoulders, and a relaxed, confident smile. He wasn't glaring at me. He wasn't laughing. I was looking at me the way a man looks at an attractive woman. I stammered, my heart leaping into my throat. I desperately tried to pitch my voice higher, softening it to a breathy whisper. Thank you. I'm Daniel, he said, taking a step closer, leaning casually against the back of the empty chair next to me. His eyes swept over my face, lingering for a fraction of a second, on my berry-painted lips before meeting my eyes again. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just saw you sitting here, and I had to come over. Red is definitely your color. My brain short-circuited. Up until this exact second, the only validation I had received was from Megan and Claire, women who knew the truth, women who were actively helping me construct this illusion. But Daniel didn't know the backstory. I didn't know about the missing duffel bag or the oversized t-shirts. He looked at my curled hair, my eyeliner, the curve of my waist in the A-line dress, and my nylon-covered legs crossed under the table. And he computed one thing, woman. I'm Evelyn, I lied. The name spilled out of my mouth before I could even process it. It was a name I had always liked, soft and vintage. Evelyn, Daniel repeated, testing the syllables on his tongue. He smiled, and it made the corners of his eyes crinkle. It fits you. You have this sort of classic, old Hollywood elegance going on. Are you from around here? No, I breathed out, my chest rising and falling rapidly beneath the cream coat. Just visiting for the weekend. Well, their gain is our loss. He chuckled softly. The conversation only lasted another minute before Megan and Claire returned. Daniel politely introduced himself, told me it was a pleasure to meet me, and retreated to his friends at the bar, throwing one last, lingering glance over his shoulder before turning away. When he was gone, my hands were shaking so violently, I had to set my water glass down to avoid spilling it. I was drowning in a violent storm of conflicting emotions. I was terrified he was going to clock my jawline or the size of my hands. I was deeply, profoundly embarrassed to be deceiving him. But roaring above the fear and the shame was something else. A blinding, overwhelming thrill. I didn't just survive his gaze, I blossomed under it. The way his eyes had swept over my dress. The respectful but undeniable interest in his voice. It sent a hot, liquid heat pooling low in my stomach. I had spent my entire life feeling invisible as a man. But as a woman, in a red dress and heels, I possessed a gravitational pull. I commanded attention. The terrifying realization rooted itself in my mind, refusing to let go. I liked it. I want him to look at me again. Hours later, the restaurant, the wine, and the laughter were behind us. We were back in the quiet isolation of the lake house. Everyone had gone to bed. I sat alone on the edge of the guest bed. Slowly, I reached down and unclasped the ankle straps of the black pumps, letting them drop to the floor with a soft thud. I wiggled my toes, feeling the exquisite, aching relief in my arches, a physical ache that belonged entirely to womanhood. I stood up and walked over to the full-length mirror one last time. The makeup was slightly smudged, the curls in my hair had loosened into soft waves, and the red dress was slightly wrinkled at the hips. I stared deep into my own eyes, searching for the man who had lost his luggage yesterday afternoon. I was gone, erased by a stroke of eyeliner and a pair of sheer tights. I pressed my fingertips against the cool glass of the mirror. tracing the outline of the woman looking back at me. If I loved the feeling of the fabric, if I loved the grace of the heels, and if I secretly, desperately loved the way a man looked at me when I wore them, then who am I? Really, I asked my reflection in the silent, moonlit room. What exactly am I looking for? The weekend ended and the armor had to go back on. My duffel bag was waiting for me in the hallway when Megan and I returned home. It looked like a foreign object, a grim reminder of a life that felt entirely gray and heavy. I unpacked my dark t-shirts, my stiff denim jeans, my shapeless hoodies, and folded them into my dresser drawers. It felt like burying someone alive. Monday morning arrived, and Ethan Cole returned to his life. I went to work at the small architectural firm downtown. I sat at my desk, drafting blueprints, blending in with the neutral-toned, practical environment. I spoke with the same low, monotone voice I always used. I kept my head down. But I couldn't stop the phantom sensations. While my boss was talking about load-bearing walls and zoning permits, my mind was miles away. I was thinking about the sharp, distinct click of a heel on pavement. I could feel the ghost of a cinched waist pulling snug against my ribs. Beneath my heavy, canvas work trousers, my bare legs felt rough, naked, and profoundly wrong without the sleek, dark compression of nylon. I was going through withdrawal. By Wednesday evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't tell Megan. I didn't ask for permission or guidance. I waited until the sun set, pulled up the hood of my jacket, and drove to a large, brightly lit department store on the edge of town. Walking into the women's clothing section was like stepping onto a hostile alien planet. My heart hammered against my ribs, and my palms sweat profusely. I felt like a criminal, a pervert waiting to be caught and exposed. Every time a sales associate made eye contact with me, I quickly looked away, pretending to be intensely interested in a display of men's ties nearby. But the pull was too strong. I needed to feel the fabrics again. I needed to prove to myself that the weekend hadn't been a fluke. I started small. I found a rack of cardigans and quickly grabbed 3, one navy blue, one soft pink, and one crisp white. I didn't bother trying them on. I just guessed the size and shoved them under my arm. Then, I found the hosiery aisle. It was overwhelming, racks upon racks of deniers, shades, and textures. My hands trembled as I grabbed 3 packages of sheer pantyhose, 1 nude, 2 black. I paid quickly at a self-checkout register, avoiding human contact entirely, and practically ran to my car. When I got home, I locked the door to my bedroom and pulled the blinds tightly shut. I stripped off my work clothes and tore open the packages. I started with the blue cardigan and the nude pantyhose. It was the safest, most unassuming combination, reminiscent of that first afternoon at the lake house, when I slid the nylon up my legs and buttoned the soft knit over my chest. A massive wave of tension left my body. I let out a shaky breath, closing my eyes. It wasn't the thrill of the red dress, it was a profound, quiet relief. The blue was calm. It was a gentle reminder that the woman inside me was allowed to breathe. 2 days later, I drove to a different store. This time, I bought a knee-length, pleated skirt in a soft blush pink, and a delicate white blouse with a Peter Pan collar. When I wore the pink, my posture changed entirely. I didn't just feel calm. I felt innocent, playful, and deeply feminine. I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, smoothing the pleats over my thighs, pointing my nylon-clad toes, and giggling softly at a television show. The pink wasn't just a color, it was an emotional state, a deliberate rejection of the hard, stoic masculinity I had been forced to project for 20 years. By the following week, the fear of the store had subsided into a low-level anxiety. I marched into a boutique and bought a sleek black A-line dress and a pair of sheer, black tights. I wanted to recreate the feeling of the red dress, the power I had felt under Daniel's gaze. When I put the black dress on, I didn't feel innocent. I felt sophisticated. I walked back and forth across my bedroom floor, practicing the slow, rhythmic sway of my hips, imagining the phantom click-clack of heels I didn't own yet. But the most significant shift happened not with the dresses or the cardigans, but with the garments underneath. I realized that the illusion felt hollow if the foundation was masculine. So late one night, I bought my first pieces of lingerie online. When the package arrived, it felt like handling contraband. Inside were simple, elegant pieces, a lace-trimmed bralette in a soft cream color, and a pair of matching seamless panties. The first time I put them on, the sensation was entirely different from the dresses. A dress was an external performance, a costume meant for the world to see. But the lingerie was a deeply intimate secret. It hugged my body closely, the delicate lace contrasting sharply with my skin. I put on my heavy work trousers and my oversized flannel shirt over the lingerie and drove to the grocery store. It was the most surreal experience of my life. I walked down the produce aisle, looking exactly like Ethan Cole. I bought milk, eggs, and bread. I nodded to the cashier, my voice low and flat. I was performing masculinity flawlessly. But with every step I took, I felt the soft glide of silk against my skin. I felt the delicate lace of the bralette resting against my chest. No one in the store had any idea. I was harboring a massive, beautiful secret just millimeters beneath my rough exterior. The lingerie changed everything. It made me realize that the woman wasn't just a costume I put on when I wore a dress. She was always there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. The silken lace became my anchor, a tangible reminder of my true self, even when the world demanded Ethan. The pantyhose, too, became a daily necessity. I began wearing nude tights under my jeans every single day. I hated the coarse friction of denim against my bare skin. I craved the smooth, sleek barrier the nylon provided. I was standing at the bus stop one rainy Tuesday morning, waiting to commute to the firm. The wind was biting, and the sky was a miserable gray. I had my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my heavy wool coat. I looked down at my scuffed leather work boots and the hem of my jeans. Underneath, I knew, my legs were encased in smooth, flawless nylon. Under the heavy wool, my chest was wrapped in cream lace. A profound realization struck me, cold and clear as the rain. My body hadn't physically changed. I hadn't taken hormones or undergone surgery. But my relationship to my body had fundamentally shifted. I no longer viewed my legs as functional limbs meant for carrying weight. I viewed them as a canvas for sheer elegant fabrics. I no longer viewed my chest as a flat expanse of muscle. I viewed it as a space meant for delicate lace. The transformation wasn't happening in the mirror anymore. It was happening in my mind. I wasn't just dressing up. I was slowly, meticulously, rewriting the code of my own existence. And the terrifying part was I didn't want to stop. 2 weeks later, the double life began to crack. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the city was bathed in crisp, golden autumn sunlight. I had spent the morning deep cleaning my apartment, a chore I now performed exclusively in a pair of sheer black tights, a pleated pink skirt, and a soft, oversized sweater. It felt entirely natural. The fabric swishing against my knees as I vacuumed had become a comforting background noise. Around 2:00 p.m., I realized I had run out of coffee beans. My local roaster was just 3 blocks away. Normally, I would have stripped off the skirt, peeled off the tights, and thrown on my rigid jeans and a hoodie. But as I stood in my bedroom, looking at the pile of masculine clothes, a wave of profound exhaustion washed over me. I was so tired of changing. I was so tired of hiding. I looked in the mirror. My hair was longer now, falling softly around my ears. My skin was clearer, a result of the meticulous skincare routine Megan had taught me. I was wearing the pink skirt, the black tights, and the oversized sweater. It wasn't a glamorous evening look. It was a casual, comfortable weekend outfit. It's just 3 blocks, I told myself, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Just grab the coffee and come right back. No one will care. I didn't let myself think about it too long. I slipped on a pair of low-profile, black ballet flats, a recent, terrifying purchase, and grabbed my keys. I took a deep breath, unlocked my front door, and stepped out into the world. The first 50 yards were agonizing. Every gust of wind that caught the pleats of my skirt felt like a spotlight hitting my skin. I kept my head down, staring intently at the pavement, waiting for the laughter, the pointing, the inevitable confrontation. But as I turned the corner onto the main avenue, something strange happened. The world didn't stop spinning. A woman pushing a stroller walked past me and didn't even blink. An older man walking his dog gave me a polite, absent-minded nod. I wasn't a spectacle. I was just another person walking down the street on a Saturday afternoon. The fear began to recede, replaced by a slow, blooming warmth in my chest. I lifted my chin slightly. I adjusted my stride, allowing my hips to sway naturally, feeling the satisfying tap of the ballet flats on the concrete. I was doing it. I was existing in the daylight, exactly as I wanted to be. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the coffee shop, the bell jingling cheerfully above my head. The aroma of roasted espresso washed over me. I stepped up to the counter, keeping my eyes fixed on the menu board above the barista's head. "Just a pound of the house blend, whole bean, please," I said, pitching my voice slightly higher, softer. "Sure thing," the barista chirped, turning around to grab a bag. I stepped back to wait, pulling my wallet out of my pocket. "Evelyn." The voice hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. It was deep, smooth, and intimately familiar. I froze, the blood drained from my face, and my fingers went numb, nearly dropping my wallet. Slowly, agonizingly, I turned around. Standing by the condiment bar, holding a steaming paper cup, was Daniel Brooks. I was wearing a casual gray Henley and dark jeans, looking just as effortlessly handsome as he had that night at the Harbor restaurant. My brain completely short-circuited. My first instinct was to bolt, to drop the wallet, run out the door, and sprint the 3 blocks back to my apartment. I wasn't wearing the glamorous red dress. I wasn't wearing makeup or heels. I was wearing a casual skirt and a sweater, my hair unstyled. I was going to see through the illusion. I was going to realize I was just a guy playing dress-up. But before I could move, Daniel smiled. It was the same warm, crinkling smile he had given me weeks ago. "It is you," he said, taking a step toward me. I didn't look disgusted. He didn't look confused. He looked genuinely happy to see me. "I thought I recognized you. How have you been?" My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I swallowed hard, forcing my panicked brain to form words. Hi, Daniel, right." "Good memory," he chuckled, stopping a respectful distance away. His eyes did a quick, subtle sweep of my outfit. The oversized sweater, the pink skirt, the black tights. He didn't flinch. "I thought you were just visiting the harbor for the weekend." "I was," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart was beating so fast I was afraid he could hear it. "I live here in the city." "Small world," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. He leaned against the counter, perfectly relaxed, while I felt like a vibrating tuning fork. "I was actually just thinking about you the other day. I go to that harbor restaurant pretty often, and I haven't seen you there since. I was thinking about me." The words echoed in my skull. "Here's your coffee, miss," the barista called out, sliding the bag of beans across the counter. "Thanks," I mumbled, quickly paying and grabbing the bag. I turned back to Daniel, desperate to escape before the facade crumbled. "It was nice seeing you. Daniel, I really have to go." "Wait," he said quickly, reaching out a hand, though he didn't touch me. "Do you have a minute? Just to sit down? I promise I'm not a creep. I really enjoyed talking to you that night, even if it was brief." I looked at the small, round tables near the window. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run. But looking into Daniel's eyes, I saw something that silenced the panic. I saw genuine, unadulterated interest. He wasn't staring at my jawline or the size of my hands. He was looking right into my eyes. "Okay," I breathed out, "just for a minute." We sat down at a small table by the window. The sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, my knees pressed firmly together, hyper-aware of every micro-movement I made. "So," Daniel began, setting his cup down, "Evelyn, what do you do in the city besides buying excellent coffee?" I hesitated. I couldn't tell him I was a draftsman at a conservative architectural firm. That was Ethan's life. I work in design, I lied smoothly. The feminine persona taking over. A protective shield sliding into place. Mostly residential stuff. It's okay, pays the bills. Sign? He nodded, his eyes lighting up with genuine curiosity. That makes sense. You have a really distinct style. Even today, you look... He paused, his gaze dropping briefly to the pink skirt before returning to my face. You just look very put together, very elegant. I noticed it that night at the restaurant, too. The compliment hit me differently this time. At the restaurant, the thrill had come from the validation of the red dress, the makeup, the heels. The thrill was that he had bought the illusion. But today, sitting in the harsh sunlight in a casual skirt and no makeup, the compliment felt infinitely more profound. He wasn't complimenting a carefully constructed costume. He was complimenting me. I was noticing my choices, the way I paired the oversized sweater with the feminine pleats, the way the black tights anchored the pastel pink. We talked for 20 minutes. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating conversation of my life. He asked about my favorite neighborhoods in the city, my favorite books, what kind of music I listened to, and slowly, the panic began to fade. I realized I didn't have to pitch my voice artificially high. I didn't have to overact the feminine gestures. I just had to talk. Because Daniel wasn't looking for a caricature of a woman. I was just looking for Evelyn. Listen, Daniel said eventually, glancing at his watch. I have to get to a meeting, but I'm really glad I ran into you. He pulled a pen from his pocket and grabbed a napkin from the table. He scribbled a number down and slid it across the table toward me. If you ever want to get dinner in the city this time, no driving to the harbor required. Give me a call. I'd really love to see you again. He stood up, gave me that warm, devastating smile one last time, and walked out the door. I sat alone at the table for a long time, staring at the napkin. The numbers were written in sharp, black ink. A seismic shift was occurring in my mind. Before today, I had thought of Evelyn as a secret room in my house, a place I retreated to when Ethan's life became too heavy. I thought I put on the clothes to experience a temporary escape, a fleeting rush of dopamine. But looking at Daniel's phone number, the truth hit me with the force of a freight train. Daniel didn't want to date an outfit. I didn't want to date a red dress or a pink skirt. I wanted to date the person who wore them. He had seen past the clothes, past the lack of makeup, and had connected with the personality underneath. He had connected with Evelyn. The narrative in my head inverted completely. I wasn't a man dressing up in women's clothes to feel something different. I was a woman who had been forced to wear men's clothes her entire life. And the pink skirt, the tights, the cardigans, they weren't an escape. They were the key to letting my true self out. I picked up the napkin, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my pocket. I stood up, smoothed the pleats of my skirt, and walked out of the coffee shop. I didn't look down at the pavement on the walk home. I kept my head high, feeling the autumn breeze on my face, knowing with absolute, terrifying certainty that Ethan Cole was never going to come back. The decision to fully embrace Evelyn wasn't a single, explosive moment of clarity. It was a slow, deliberate dismantling of the life I had built for Ethan. It was a terrifying series of small, irrevocable steps. The first step was acknowledging that I couldn't do this alone. The clothes, the makeup, the subtle shifts in posture, they were tools. But they weren't the whole architecture. I needed guidance from someone who understood the foundation. I found a support group online, specifically for individuals exploring gender identity. The first time I attended a meeting held in a drab, fluorescent-lit community center basement, I sat in the back row, wearing my baggiest jeans and a dark hoodie, my heart pounding so hard I felt nauseous. I introduced myself as Ethan, my voice thick with shame. But over the next few weeks, the shame began to dissolve. I listened to stories that mirrored the chaotic, terrifying storm in my own head. I met people who had walked the same treacherous path, shedding their heavy armor layer by agonizing layer. That was where I met Lauren Hayes. Lauren was in her late 30s, a striking trans woman with warm, empathetic eyes, and a quiet, unshakable confidence. She didn't offer unsolicited advice or push me to make grand declarations. She simply listened. We met for coffee one afternoon, a few weeks after I had received Daniel's number. I still hadn't called him. The napkin was sitting on my nightstand, a terrifying, tantalizing promise of a life I wasn't sure I was ready to inhabit. "I'm scared," I admitted to Lauren, staring down at my cappuccino.
I was wearing my male clothes. It still felt too risky to present as Evelyn in broad daylight.
"In my own neighborhood. I'm scared that if I call him, I'm deceiving him."
What happens when he finds out about Ethan?
Lauren stirred her tea slowly, the silver spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. "Are you Ethan, though?" she asked, her voice gentle but piercing. I looked up at her, my throat suddenly tight. "I don't know. I have been for 26 years.
"That's how long you've played the role,"
she corrected. "But when you put on the dress, when you put on the tights..."
"Are you pretending to be someone else? Or are you finally taking off a mask?"
I thought about the red dress. I thought about the first time I wore the blue chiffon at Claire's lake house. I thought about the profound, aching relief I felt when I slipped on the lingerie beneath my work clothes. "I feel like I'm taking off a mask," I whispered, the truth hanging in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. "Then you aren't deceiving him," Lauren said softly.
"You're just terrified of showing him the whole picture."
"But Evelyn, honey, you can't build a life on a foundation of hiding."
It was the first time someone outside of my immediate circle had called me Evelyn.
The name settled over me like a warm blanket. It felt incredibly right. "I need to see her," I said suddenly, a fierce, desperate resolve blooming in my chest. "I need to see Evelyn properly, not just me fumbling in my bedroom."
"I need to see if she's real." Lauren smiled, a deep, knowing smile.
"I know exactly where we need to go." 2 days later, Lauren and Megan drove me to a small, discreet styling studio on the outskirts of the city. The studio was run by a woman named Chloe, a genius with makeup and hair,
who specialized in helping trans women and cross-dressers find their image. Walking into the studio felt like crossing a threshold into another dimension.
The air smelled of hairspray, expensive powder, and lavender. Racks of clothing lined the walls, a kaleidoscope of silks, velvets, and chiffons. "All right, Evelyn," Chloe beamed, clapping her hands together. "Let's find the woman hiding in there."
She sat me down in a plush leather chair in front of a massive, brightly lit vanity mirror.
Lauren and Megan sat on a small sofa behind me, offering encouraging smiles in the reflection.
The transformation process was meticulous, clinical, and profoundly emotional.
It wasn't just throwing on a dress and some lipstick. It was a deliberate, artistic reconstruction of my features.
Chloe started by cleansing my face, massaging a rich moisturizer into my skin until it felt plump and soft.
Then, the real magic began.
She applied a color-correcting primer to neutralize the faint shadow of my beard line,
followed by a flawless, lightweight foundation that smoothed out my complexion,
racing the masculine ruggedness.
With expert precision, she began to contour.
She didn't try to paint a new face over mine.
She used shadows and highlights to soften my jawline, bring out my cheekbones, and subtly narrow my nose. She shaped my eyebrows, arching them delicately to open up my eyes. Every stroke of the brush chipped away at Ethan. I watched, mesmerized, as the man in the mirror slowly faded, replaced by someone softer, someone more elegant, someone undeniably female.
Chloe applied a soft, smoky eyeshadow, a sharp wing of liquid liner, and a set of natural-looking false lashes that made my eyes look huge and expressive. She finished the face with a sweep of peach blush and a swipe of a glossy, rose-colored lipstick. Next was the hair. My own hair had grown out to a decent length, but it was unruly. Chloe washed it, blew it out straight, and then used a curling wand to create loose, cascading waves that framed my newly softened face perfectly.
When she finally stepped back, laying her brushes down, the silence in the room was deafening. I stared into the brightly lit mirror, my breath caught in my throat, a sharp, ragged gasp.
Tears immediately sprang to my eyes, threatening to ruin Chloe's meticulous work.
I didn't see a man in drag. I didn't see a caricature. I saw a woman. She was beautiful. Yes, but more importantly, she looked familiar. She looked like the person I had been conversing with in the dark, quiet corners of my mind for my entire life. The disconnect was gone. The image on the outside finally, perfectly, match the feeling on the inside. "Oh my God," I whispered, lifting a trembling hand to touch my cheek. Behind me, in the mirror, I saw Megan wipe a tear from her own eye. Lauren was smiling, a look of profound shared understanding on her face. "We're not done yet," Chloe said gently, handing me a tissue to dab my eyes. "Now we dress her." Chloe led me to the racks of clothing. She didn't hand me a red, attention-grabbing dress or a playful pink skirt. She pulled out a garment that was breathtaking in its understated elegance. It was a midi-length dress in a soft, champagne pink hue. It had a square neckline that accentuated the collarbone without revealing too much, a fitted, tailored bodice, and a skirt that fell in soft, heavy folds to the mid-calf. It was a dress designed for a woman who knew exactly who she was. I retreated to the dressing room. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage the zipper. I slipped into a pair of sheer, nude pantyhose, the familiar, comforting compression grounding me, and stepped into the dress. Chloe had provided a pair of simple nude, pointed-toe pumps with a 3-inch heel. I stepped out of the dressing room. Megan gasped audibly. Lauren stood up from the sofa. I walked over to the full-length mirror. The champagne dress draped over my body perfectly. The square neckline and the tailored bodice created a feminine silhouette, while the soft pink color complemented the expertly applied makeup and the cascading waves of my hair. The nude heels elongated my legs, forcing my posture into a graceful, elegant stance. I didn't feel the frantic, terrified adrenaline I had felt at the Harbor restaurant. I didn't feel the anxious, hyper-aware vigilance I had felt at the coffee shop. I felt a profound, earth-shattering peace. I wasn't trying on a different version of myself anymore. I was standing in the center of my own truth. "Evelyn," Megan whispered, walking up behind me and resting her hands on my shoulders, looking at our reflection together. "You're beautiful." "I know," I said softly, the words slipping out with a quiet, undeniable conviction. I looked at the woman in the mirror, really looked at her, and I made a silent promise. I was never going to lock her away again. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I didn't take the makeup off immediately. I didn't take the dress off. I sat on the edge of my bed, bathed in the soft glow of my bedside lamp, and picked up my phone. I pulled the napkin out of my bedside drawer. The numbers were slightly smudged, but still legible. My heart thumped a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs. The fear of deception was gone. I knew who I was. I knew what I looked like. And if Daniel couldn't handle the truth of my journey, then he wasn't meant for Evelyn. I typed the number into my phone and pressed call. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hello?" His voice was deep, laced with a hint of sleepiness. "Hi, Daniel," I said, my voice steady, naturally sitting in the softer, higher register I had found over the past few weeks. "It's Evelyn, from the coffee shop." There was a brief pause, and then a warm, unmistakable smile entered his voice. "Evelyn, I was starting to think you'd lost the napkin." "I didn't," I smiled, looking at my reflection in the dark window pane of my bedroom. "I was just making sure I was ready." "Ready for what?" he asked softly. "Ready for dinner," I replied, my heart soaring. "When are you free?" The transition from Ethan to Evelyn wasn't a clean break. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. The days following my makeover and the phone call to Daniel were a chaotic blur of intense euphoria and paralyzing terror. The hardest part wasn't the external changes, it was the internal reckoning. I sat at my drafting table at the architectural firm on a Tuesday, dressed in my standard uniform of a loose button-down shirt and stiff slacks. But underneath, I was wearing a delicate, black lace bralette and sheer nude pantyhose. The juxtaposition was dizzying. I looked around at my male colleagues, laughing loudly by the water cooler, discussing sports and weekend renovations, and I felt a million miles away from them. I wasn't one of them. I hadn't been one of them for a very long time. That evening, I had a scheduled therapy session with Dr. Aris, a gender specialist Lauren had recommended. Her office was a calm, neutral space filled with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. "You're living in two different worlds right now, Evelyn," Dr. Aris said gently, watching me fidget with the edge of the throw pillow in my lap. I had come to the session presenting female wearing the black A-line dress. A tasteful amount of makeup, and my low heel. It was still a massive effort to leave the apartment like this, requiring an hour of preparation and a dozen pep talks. I know, I sighed, crossing my nylon-clad legs. It's exhausting. When I'm Ethan, I feel like I'm holding my breath. But when I'm Evelyn, I'm terrified someone is going to clock me. That they'll see through the makeup and the clothes and see a fraud. But who is the fraud? She asked, tilting her head. Is the fraud the woman sitting in front of me, who feels comfortable and at peace? Or is the fraud the man who goes to work every day feeling suffocated? I looked down at my hands. They were softer now, the nails shaped and painted a subtle nude. Ethan is the fraud, I admitted, the truth tasting bitter but necessary. So the question is, how do we begin to dismantle the fraud safely? The dismantling began with Megan. We met at a quiet cafe on a Saturday morning. I was dressed in a casual, feminine outfit, a soft, cream-colored turtleneck sweater, a pleated skirt, and sheer black tights. I had done my makeup carefully, focusing on a natural, soft look. Megan stirred her latte, looking at me with a mixture of pride and profound sadness. I remember the first time I realized something was happening, she said softly, staring into her cup. You were 12. Mom had bought me a new dress for a school dance, a really pretty, soft lavender one. I caught you in my room, running your hands over the tulle. You looked so guilty, like you had been caught stealing. I yelled at you to get out. She looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I wish I had understood then. I wish I had told you it was okay. I reached across the table, my soft hand covering hers. You couldn't have known. Meg, I didn't even know. I just knew that the clothes you got to wear felt right, and the clothes I was forced to wear felt like punishment. So what's the plan? She asked, squeezing my hand. Are you going to come out at work to Mom and Dad? The thought of my conservative parents sent a spike of cold dread through my stomach. Not yet, I whispered. I'm not strong enough yet. I need to figure out how to exist as Evelyn in the world before I can explain her to them. And Daniel? She prompted, a knowing smile playing on her lips. I blushed, looking away. We're going to dinner on Friday, to a nice Italian place downtown. Evelyn, Megan said seriously, leaning in, you have to tell him. You can't start a relationship based on an omission this huge. If he's a good guy, he'll understand. If he's not, you need to know now. I knew she was right, but the thought of sitting across from Daniel, looking into those warm, interested eyes, and dropping a bomb that could obliterate the connection we had built, it was paralyzing. Friday evening arrived with the speed of a runaway train. I spent 3 hours getting ready. I didn't want to look overdone, but I needed to look flawless. I needed the armor of Evelyn to be impenetrable. I chose a sleek, navy blue wrap dress that cinched perfectly at my waist, highlighting the subtle curves I was learning to create with posture and shapewear. I wore sheer, black tights and a pair of elegant, pointed-toe black pumps. My makeup was pristine, my hair falling in soft, deliberate waves. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who looked put together, sophisticated and completely terrified. I took an Uber to the restaurant, my heart hammering against my ribs the entire ride. I walked through the heavy wooden doors of the Italian bistro, the familiar, comforting click of my heels on the tile floor, offering a small measure of grounding. Daniel was waiting at the bar. I was wearing a tailored navy suit, looking devastatingly handsome. When he saw me, his face lit up. He didn't just smile. His entire posture shifted toward me, a gravitational pull of genuine attraction. Evelyn, he breathed, stepping forward and kissing me gently on the cheek. The scent of his cologne, cedar and bergamot, made my head spin. You look absolutely incredible. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. You don't look so bad yourself. The hostess led us to a quiet, dimly lit booth in the back. The atmosphere was romantic, intimate, and utterly suffocating. I couldn't focus on the menu. I couldn't focus on the wine list. The secret I was carrying felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, threatening to crack my ribs. Daniel was charming, attentive, and easy to talk to. We discussed architecture. I carefully skirted around my actual job title, and travel, and books.
He looked at me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously seen and completely hidden.
Halfway through the main course, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The longer I waited, the more it felt like a lie. "Daniel," I interrupted softly, setting my fork down.
My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together in my lap,
pressing them against the smooth nylon covering my thighs. He looked up, sensing the shift in my tone. The playful smile faded, replaced by quiet concern. "What is it? Is something wrong with the food?"
"No, the food is wonderful," I said, taking a deep, shuddering breath.
I looked into his eyes, searching for a trace of the judgment I feared so deeply. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen before you say anything." He set his wine glass down, giving me his full, undivided attention. "Okay, I'm listening." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, summoning every ounce of courage Lauren, Megan, and Dr. Aris had helped me build. "When we met at the harbor," I began, my voice barely a whisper.
"And when we ran into each other at the coffee shop, I wasn't entirely honest with you. Not about who I am as a person, but about my history."
I opened my eyes. He was watching me intently, his brow furrowed slightly. "I'm a trans woman, Daniel," I said,
the words falling into the space between us like heavy stones. "I haven't been living as Evelyn my whole life. I'm just starting to transition.
I didn't tell you because I was terrified, and because when I'm with you, I just feel like me."
"But I couldn't sit here and let you think you knew everything."
The silence that followed was the longest, most agonizing silence of my life. I watched his face closely, waiting for the shock, the disgust,
the polite but immediate withdrawal.
Danielle looked at me. He didn't look away. He didn't flinch.
He reached across the table,
his warm, strong hand gently covering my trembling, manicured fingers. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice remarkably steady, "thank you for telling me."
I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 26 years. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, threatening to ruin my meticulously applied mascara.
You're not angry, you don't feel lied to."
"I'd be lying if I said I wasn't surprised," he admitted,
his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "But angry, no, I understand why you didn't tell me right away."
"The world isn't exactly kind to people figuring this out." He paused, looking deep into my eyes, past the makeup, past the wrap dress, past the carefully constructed exterior.
"When I saw you at the harbor," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur, "I saw a beautiful, elegant woman. When we talked at the coffee shop, I saw a smart, engaging woman I wanted to get to know better.
And sitting here right now, I see an incredibly brave woman. None of that has changed."
A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down my cheek. I quickly reached up to wipe it away, but Daniel's hand was faster, gently brushing it away with his thumb. "I like you, Evelyn," he said, the conviction in his voice, silencing the last remaining doubts in my mind.
"I don't care about the history, I care about the woman sitting in front of me right now."
The rest of the dinner was a blur of profound, overwhelming relief. The heavy weight had lifted.
I didn't have to monitor my pitch, or hyper-analyze my posture, or worry about a masculine mannerism slipping through. I could just exist.
When he walked me to my Uber at the end of the night, the crisp autumn air nipping at my exposed skin, he pulled me into a gentle embrace. I wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my cheek against his chest, inhaling the scent of cedar and bergamot. "I had a really wonderful time," he whispered against my hair. "Me too," I replied, pulling back slightly to look up at him. He leaned in, and our lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It was my first kiss as Evelyn. It didn't feel forced, or awkward, or performative. It felt entirely, perfectly right. I got into the back of the Uber, watching Daniel wave as the car pulled away from the curb. I looked down at my hands, resting on my lap. The navy blue wrap dress was slightly wrinkled. My tights had a tiny snag near the knee. I caught my reflection in the dark window of the car. My lipstick was smudged. I wasn't flawless anymore. The armor of perfect femininity I had spent 3 hours constructing had cracked. But as I looked at the smudged, imperfect woman in the reflection, a beautiful, terrifying realization washed over me. I didn't need the armor to be real.
I didn't need the perfect makeup or the flawless dress to be a woman.
The clothes had been the bridge, the tool that allowed me to access the truth hidden inside. But the truth was no longer dependent on the fabric. I was Evelyn Cole, and for the first time in my entire life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. 8 months had passed since that dinner at the Italian bistro, and in that time, the architecture of my life had been completely rebuilt. The double life had become unsustainable, a fracturing of my soul that I could no longer endure. But piece by piece, I let Ethan fade into the archives of my past. Coming out at the firm had been a gauntlet of awkward HR meetings and confused stares. But walking into the office for the first time in a tailored emerald blouse and a pencil skirt had felt like inhaling pure oxygen after a lifetime of drowning. Telling my parents was an ongoing, delicate negotiation of grief and acceptance. But I was surviving it. I was no longer compartmentalizing Evelyn into evenings and weekends. I was simply living. When the weather turned warm again, shedding the bitter chill of winter,
Claire invited us back to the lake house for the first weekend of June.
This time, the dynamic was different. Megan and Claire were driving up early, and I was driving up later in the afternoon. And this time, Daniel was coming with me.
Packing my suitcase the night before the trip was a surreal experience.
I stood in my bedroom, looking at the neat stacks of clothing on my bed. There was no panic over a missing duffel bag.
There were no oversized t-shirts, no heavy denim jeans, no stiff, shapeless armor. Instead, I folded a pair of high-waisted linen trousers, a silk camisole, a floral sundress,
and my collection of sheer hosiery. And then, I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a garment bag. Inside was the red dress, the A-line, 3/4 sleeve dress that Megan had coaxed me into wearing that fateful night. I traced the fabric with my manicured fingertips. I hadn't worn it since that evening at the harbor. For a long time, it had felt too monumental, a museum piece representing the explosive birth of my true self. But as I packed it carefully into my suitcase, I realized I didn't want it to be a relic.
I wanted to wear it not as a terrified man experiencing a fleeting thrill,
but as the woman who actually owned it.
Daniel and I arrived at the lake house just as the late afternoon sun was beginning to dip
toward the tree line, casting long, golden shadows across the water.
We carried our bags inside, greeted by the sounds of Megan and Claire laughing on the back porch, the clinking of wine glasses drifting through the open screen door.
"I'll take the bags to the room," Daniel said, kissing my temple. "Go say hi. I'll grab us a drink." I smiled, watching him walk down the hallway. He moved through my life with such an effortless, grounding presence. I didn't see me as a project, or a secret, or an anomaly. He just saw his girlfriend. An hour later, I retreated to the guest bedroom to shower and change for dinner.
It was the exact same room where this entire journey had begun.
The same white quilt on the bed, the same vanity mirror. I stood in the center of the room, listening to the water running in the adjoining bathroom, and closed my eyes. The memories washed over me, the sheer panic, the suffocating heat of my male clothes, the terrified awe when I had first slipped the blue chiffon over my head. I opened my eyes and looked at the red dress laid out on the bed. I took my time getting ready. It was no longer a frantic, secretive rush. It was a ritual of self-love. After showering, I sat at the vanity. My hair, which I had been meticulously growing out, now fell softly past my collarbones. I didn't need Chloe or Megan to style me anymore. My hands moved with practiced muscle memory. I applied a light foundation, a subtle sweep of bronzer, a touch of mascara, and a matte, crimson lipstick that perfectly matched the dress I was about to wear. I stood up and reached for my lingerie.
A matching set of black lace, no longer a secret hidden beneath rough canvas,
but simply my underwear. Next came the hosiery. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a pair of sheer black pantyhose from their packaging, and gathered the nylon in my thumbs. I pointed my toes, sliding the sheer, dark fabric up my calves, over my knees, and up my thighs. The gentle, familiar compression settled over my skin. It didn't feel like a taboo thrill anymore. It felt like an essential, comforting layer of my daily existence. It smoothed my silhouette, making my legs feel elegant and defined. Then, I picked up the red dress. I stepped into it, pulling it up over my hips and sliding my arms into the sleeves. I reached behind my back, my flexible fingers easily finding the zipper, and pulled it up. The bodice hugged my ribs snugly, and the heavy fabric of the A-line skirt fell perfectly into place, hovering just above my nylon-clad knees. Finally, I slipped my feet into the black, pointed toe pumps. The 2-inch heels immediately shifted my posture, engaging my calves and tilting my pelvis slightly forward, creating the familiar, feminine arch in my lower back. I turned to face the full-length mirror. I remembered standing in this exact spot a year ago. Back then, I was terrified of the reflection. I felt like a trespasser in a woman's body, waiting for the universe to punish me for daring to try on the clothing. I had felt like I was playing a character, balancing on a razor's edge between a fragile fantasy and a crushing reality. But looking in the mirror today, the disconnect was entirely gone. The woman looking back at me wasn't a costume. She wasn't an alter ego. The makeup wasn't a mask to hide behind. It was an accent to the features that were undeniably mine. The dress wasn't a disguise. It was simply my aesthetic. The sway of my hips, the softness of my shoulders, the sleek sheen of the pantyhose. It wasn't cross-dressing. It was just getting dressed. I smiled at my reflection, a deep resonant warmth blooming in my chest. I picked up my clutch, opened the bedroom door, and walked down the hallway. The rhythmic click-clack of my heels against the hardwood floors didn't sound like a performance anymore. It was just the sound of my footsteps. I pushed open the screen door and stepped out onto the wooden deck. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water. Megan and Claire were sitting at the patio table, laughing over a plate of appetizers. Danielle was leaning against the wooden railing, looking out at the lake, holding 2 glasses of white wine. Hearing the screen door shut, he turned around. His eyes found me, and time seemed to slow down. I didn't look shocked. He didn't look at me with the sudden intoxicating novelty of a man discovering a beautiful stranger, like he had that first night at the harbor. He looked at me with deep, familiar, unwavering affection. His gaze swept over the red dress, the sheer black tights, the heels, and the crimson lipstick. A slow, devastatingly handsome smile spread across his face. He pushed off the railing and walked toward me, handing me one of the wine glasses. His free hand settled naturally onto the curve of my waist, his thumb gently stroking the red fabric. "You look gorgeous, Evelyn," he murmured, leaning down to press a soft kiss to my temple, careful not to smudge my lipstick. "Thank you," I whispered, leaning into his touch, resting my hand on his chest. "I remember that dress," Megan called out from the table, a teasing, loving lilt in her voice. "I think that was the night you officially decided Ethan was a boring fashion disaster." Claire laughed, pouring herself another splash of wine. To be fair, Ethan's cargo shorts were a crime against humanity. I laughed with them, the sound ringing out clear and bright into the evening air. There was no pain in hearing his name. Ethan wasn't a dark, shameful secret anymore. I was just a shell I had outgrown, a protective cocoon that had kept me safe until I was strong enough to survive the elements. Danielle and I walked over to the railing, standing shoulder to shoulder, as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of violet and burnt orange. The cool breeze off the lake caught the skirt of my red dress, pressing the fabric gently against my legs. I took a sip of my wine, staring out at the rippling water. A profound realization washed over me, settling deep into my bones. A year ago, standing in that bedroom, my greatest, most paralyzing fear was that the world would see me in a dress. I was terrified of being discovered, of being mocked, of being stripped of the masculine armor that I thought I needed to survive. But as I stood there, leaning against the man who loved me, feeling the soft nylon against my skin and the breeze in my long hair, I realized my fears had completely inverted. I was no longer afraid of the world seeing me as a woman. My only fear, the only thing that could possibly terrify me now, was the thought of ever having to go back to a life where I had to pretend I wasn't one. I was terrified of the gray, heavy, suffocating existence where I had to fake my own reality. But looking at Daniel's hand resting over mine on the railing, I knew that fear was a ghost. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp evening air. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't playing a role for anyone's benefit. I was just a woman, standing on a porch, wearing her own clothes,